Hey there, hope you're doing well. I'm Andrew, a sad bald man from the internet, and today we're going to take some time to talk about basic programming in XR Toolkit. This is going to be a pretty rambly video of what I hope to be a series of videos where I just sit and talk about building interactables in XR Toolkit. I have a lot of very hyper-specific projects, but I would like to make some simpler videos where I can field questions from the comments and build things that hopefully help you learn more about XR Toolkit. In this video, I already have a template put together with XR Toolkit all set up. If you're going to be following along with this video, I already have a couple of videos, my 2.0 video and even my 2.3 video that go over the basics of XR Toolkit. For this particular video, I'm not going to be explaining what a variable is, what a function is, but what I'm hoping to do is take what existing knowledge you have of programming and XR Toolkit and begin to bring those two together, because I understand that it can be difficult and a little overwhelming to kind of take those two knowledge bases and kind of make them work together, because it may feel like you have these two pieces of knowledge but don't exactly know what to do with them. So we're going to be starting very, very, very basic. This was originally going to be a much larger video, but I was being a little bit too precious about it and I just want to make stuff. So we just turned the camera on, set the lights up so I don't look like a complete ghost, and we're just going to start programming. Okay, so let's see what's on the screen right now. I feel like Bob Ross when I said that. We're going to run all the colors across the screen right now. I apologize for my mic arm sounding like a junkyard, and of course my phone vibrates. So let's tell that to be quiet. Now if you download the project and you open it up, I'm using Unity 2020, you're going to get something that looks like this. And it looks a lot, if not this, very similar to the URP template. I just pulled out some of the assets because I thought they could be useful for some interactable examples. We're going to be using this drill here, and we're going to make the drill bit spin, and we're going to be utilizing just some basic code to make the bit spin, and we're going to be going over some of the events and things that we are afforded by some of the interactables. We'll also talk about some of the events, and we'll be talking about setting up those events in both the inspector as well as in code, because I know that can be a little bit difficult. But if you are a genius and you already have a project, don't worry about the template. Make a drink, hang out. It's all good to me. I don't know why I can't finish sentences sometime. All right, so what are we going to do first? Well, let's just see what we have. Like I said, we have this drill prefab here. And if I double click on it, Unity Zoom actually worked for the first time. We can expand it here, and we have this little bit that we can rotate if we're in local space. We're going to rotate it. We have a little handle that's going to be the rest of the mesh. And then we have this attach point, so when we grab it, it's going to orient itself in a way that makes sense. Now I want to double check to make sure that attach point is set, which it is, add attach transform. I think we do also have a script that I just have object rotator. It's empty. It's the one we're actually going to be writing in today, because I think it's useful to at least write some code. We will be touching on some XR Toolkit code, but a lot of this is just going to be basic like Unity code. But I think that may already be on the bit, which it is. Okay, cool. So to kind of reiterate what we're going to be doing is we'll write some rotation code and we're going to hook it up to the event in the inspector. We're also going to, like I said, do it first in the inspector, and then we're going to do it via code and talk about some of the arguments in that sense as well. But the question is now, do we start with the events or do we just start writing code? Well, I think it does probably make sense for us to at least talk a little bit about the events themselves. So if we scroll down here, you'll see that we have these hover events, we have these selection events, and we have these activate events. And hover is pretty self-explanatory. Select is when you grab the interactable. And before I even explain that, let's just talk about activate as well. And activate is going to be once you've selected the interactable, once you pull the trigger on it. And you may be thinking, well, why isn't this just called grab? Why is it called select? Because not every interactable allows you to grab it or grab it and move it around. As you can see here, this is an XR grab interactable, but I think we're already going to start looking at some code. But if you select the script here, it'll actually pull up the packages folder. And let's see if we can find the actual highlighted script. And this is the actual source code from XR Toolkit. So if you're ever fuzzy about how something works, you can actually open these scripts up in Visual Studio and see what's going on. You can't edit them. Once you reload Unity, it's going to basically restore everything. So don't try and mess with these. But you'll see we even have this XR simple interactable, which allows you to still have the same types of interactions with selecting and activating, but it doesn't have the functionality for that object to follow the hand like a grab interactable would. So that's why we kind of have these more abstracted or ambiguous names for things. So like activate, I really don't know what you could have for I think most of the time you'd be like, oh, you think it's a weapon, so you pull the trigger, you think it'd be like fire or something like that. But if we go back, you'll see that we also have all of these arguments here, that each of them have different arguments for each event here. So we have our hover enter event, hover exit, and these can be pretty confusing if you're new to XR Toolkit. So we'll take some time to talk about those as well. I think that's about enough for these silly events. Let's just open up our object rotator script and actually write some code. And the first thing that we're going to be having is some sort of speed variable. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of this empty comment, and we'll make a serialized field. We'll make it private float, and we'll just call it speed and initialize it to, I forget what good speed for this. We'll just say 50 for now. And then we'll have a private boolean so we can control if it's rotating or not. And we'll initialize that to false. And then we're going to have a number of functions here. We'll have one called start rotating, stop rotating. We'll have an update function, and then our actual rotate function. And I'll kind of explain, I guess, my sort of logic and things like this once we write it all out. So we'll just call this start rotating. Stop rotating. Have an update. And we'll have our actual rotate function. Now, sometimes this may seem a little bit obtuse of having functions like start rotating and stop rotating, where all it's going to do is set this Boolean value to true and false. But I kind of like having this because it does, instead of just having this variable be public and being able to access it directly, I do like having it protected a little bit. Also because if I needed to just debug something really quick, I could do a print statement here or something like that. So we'll have can rotate true, and then when we stop, we have can rotate equals false. So we're going to be hooking these up to our events. So when we pick up the drill and we pull the trigger to activate it, once we activate it, we're going to start rotating, and once it's deactivated, so we release the trigger, it's going to stop rotating. It's pretty straightforward, but you'd be surprised how there's been plenty of scripts I've seen where people try to take events and try to do some really strange things with them, where they'll have multiple booleans to check to see if it was just activated or if it was, and then they compare them to only do one thing. It's just a whole mess, and it's all an update, and maybe I'll show you guys an example of that one day, but let's not worry about that right now. But with an update, we'll say, hey, if this thing can rotate, let's just call the rotate function. And you may also be thinking like, well, you could just put the rotate code right here. But the thing is, sometimes when I've worked on projects, when you just dump code into update or to on enable or something like that, if somebody else comes in and sees that code there and needs to add something more, they'll just put in code right under it. And before you know it, you come back to the script and there's just lines upon lines of code that isn't in functions and is very difficult to sort of figure out what's going on, especially when the behavior you're getting isn't what you're looking for, and you have to go through all the other code these people wrote just to find the one piece that you needed. All right, besides the explanation here, we're also just going to call it just transform.rotate, and we'll type in vector3.forward just because we can multiply that by our speed variable. And then we'll put parentheses around that because we don't need to, but I like to just say, hey, this is the value that we're creating, and then we multiply it by time.delta time. Okay, this code isn't particularly the point of this, but we're just kind of getting comfortable here because we'll also be attaching some events to this programmatically. So at this point, we have a drill that rotates. So let's go back into Unity so we can actually hook that up and make it happen. All right, cool. So now that we're back in Unity, we can select our drill and we can scroll down here to our activate events. If we wanted to, it could start spinning when we grab it. So we could do that on select entered and exited. Make sure that it's not the first select entered and last select exited You could potentially do that as well, but this is more for two-handed interactions and things like that. When you only want functionality to happen once it's grabbed and not every hand that grabs it. You can get some weird results with that. But let's go to activate, and we'll hit this little plus sign on both of those, and we'll just drag in our bit. And usually, if we didn't have our function for start rotating and stop, we would just have something that would look like this, where it says bool enabled, and we would just have the checkbox. I don't personally like this because it could be very easy for someone just to accidentally click this and then it's wrong. It's nice to be able to more logically say, oh, when it's activated, the bit, or the object rotator, starts rotating, and it just has a little bit more of a flow in your brain rather than needing to check to see whatever Boolean and then go to the script. Just kind of gives a little bit more context. Okay, cool. So we have that, and then we have stop rotating. And at this point, we don't need to do this, but I will apply my changes just because it's a weird habit. Now, at this point, this should work just fine. You can put on your headset and grab it and pull the trigger, and it should work for you. However, I say that, but let's go to our, where was it? What is it? Our project settings. We'll pull it over here, and we'll go to OpenXR. Just make sure you add the correct interaction profile. I'm using the index controller, so that's the only one I've added here. But just make sure you add whichever controller you're using, and that should be fine for you. So let's close that tab. Okay, so that's the sort of first step. This is the most basic interactable you can more or less make. You can put any functionality here, whether if it's a weapon or something, it would be like, okay, just fire a projectile instead of rotating the bit of the drill. But there may be situations where, okay, you want the bit to rotate, you want to play a sound, you want to do all these other things, you want to play a particle, and before you know it, this thing gets pretty full of functionality. And I usually like to maybe just keep one thing here, maybe two. So once it gets to that pretty complex state, I try to write some other functionality to hook all this stuff up for me. We won't be writing a whole thing to do that, but we'll just I'm just going to show you how we want to make this object rotator subscribe to the interactable so we don't have to set it up in the inspector. So let's just undo that, and let's go back to our object rotator script. Now, I didn't fully plan on this, so let's see how hard I stumble through doing this on video. All right, so the first thing we want to do is add the XR Interaction Toolkit namespace, and this is going to give us access to the functionality. Like, we can't just come in here and start putting in XR Toolkit code because our script isn't necessarily going to know where that code is or what the code is. So we'll write Unity engine.xr interaction toolkit. So this will give us all that cool functionality. What we're going to do first is we're going to get a reference to that parent interactable. If you remember, the sort of bit functionality, this object rotator is on a sub-object, so we want to get a component in the parent. So that's the first thing that we'll do. So we'll make a private XR base interactable. And this is just the kind of what I was talking about earlier. It's just a generic interactable. We could write XR grab interactable, but this just makes sure that I can work with that simple interactable that I showed you as well. So we'll just call this interactable, and we'll just get it in awake. You can get it in start as well, but awake happens first, and that's just kind of what I like to do. So now that we have a reference to that, we will subscribe to those events that we just set up in the inspector with an on enable and on disable. You can also see some people do this in start and destroy as well. But the thing is, depending upon the context of the object, whether it's like a pooled object or something that you're going to be using across scenes and things like that, on enable and on disable is going to work the majority of the time. And I like to keep it consistent, where all of the events just get subscribed and unsubscribed within these. So now that we have, I almost screwed up actually, I just realized something. I'm sitting here preaching about get it in the parent and then I write get component. So let's write get component and parent. Cool. So that'll actually go up the tree and it'll go find that interactable. But once we do that, let's go to we'll get a reference to it. And this is where we can do a bunch of fun things. So we're going to say activated, and you can see that it's this type activate event. We'll add a listener, and you can see here that it's of type Unity action, and it's going to give us an argument of type activate event arguments, which we'll write a quick signature out for a function so we can have access to it and you can see what it is. But let's just write a test function really quick. So let's say test, and we'll say activate event args, we'll call it args, and then we'll just subscribe to it here. Write test, there we go. And then we'll copy it. Oh my goodness. Andrew's first day using Visual Studio. There we go. That was a little bit more difficult than it needed to be. So then we go to our activate event args. And if we wanted to, we can right click it and we go to its definition. And you can see that it's going to give us two pieces of data here. It's going to give us an interactor object and the interactable object. So in this case, it's going to give us a reference to the direct interactor that it's going to be grabbing and a reference to that grab interactable that's in our scene right now. And we can use these for executing more additional pieces of functionality. This used to just be the base interactor and interactable, and it was a little bit more versatile that way, but they introduced these interfaces that all of them get implemented into a base interactable. I think I'm already going down the road for another video, so I'll just actually stop it there. Point that I'm trying to make is there's information within these that we can use. So if we go even a step deeper within either of these, we can see that this interface gives us some additional data here. Unfortunately, this one isn't particularly useful. Let's go to the XR, let's go here. Okay, if we wanted to, we can get like the transform of this interactable or its interaction layers. The thing that was with the base interactable, it had more of this data altogether. But we'll cover this more once we start writing some custom interactables that if people want it, I'll make another video about. Let's go back here. So now that we have an actual function here that we can actually subscribe to this events, we can put our functionality in here. So if we wanted to, there's a couple ways we can do this. I'm just going to copy this. And we're just going to make these two functions here. There we go. And then we just get rid of these. And then we'll put that in there. As of right now, all I've done is we've gotten the interactable, we've gone to the activated event, and we've added a listener to say, hey, let's start rotating once it's been activated. But we obviously want to do that for once we've actually deactivated the interactable as well. So we'll need another line here to say add listener, and we'll call our stop rotating function. Actually, I already screwed up there. Let's go back. It's not activated, it's deactivated. And we want to stop rotating. Cool. But you'll notice that this is activate event args for both of these. We actually want deactivate event arguments. So another one of those things that may be a little bit confusing. And we'll just want to do something similar here. There we go. So now, instead of needing to hook this up within the inspector, we now do it programmatically through the script. And that's pretty much it for writing this script. I think let's see if we can have a better example of some other event arguments actually. So let's make a test function and we'll say select event arguments. And we'll look at this really quick. Where similar to before, we have these two interfaces, but this time we have select interactor and select interactable, and we also have a reference to the interaction manager. But let's see what information, if we can get anything from here. Right, so here we can actually check to see what all the interactables this interactor has selected. We can see what the first interactable it selected, and check to see if it has a selection, if it's active. So this is where once an event happens, if we need additional functionality to have here based on a state of an interactable, we could do that. Usually, once I kind of get into that mode, I may want to make a custom interactable where we'll be inheriting from the base or the grab interactable. And that's a little bit more advanced, so if that's something you would like to see, let me know down in the comments and we'll make a new video about it. But we actually don't need this function, and we actually haven't tested out our scene yet. So let's save this. And let's go back into Unity. Okay, cool. So now, since we've changed that argument, These are going to say that they're missing, but we actually don't need them anymore. We could have done something a little bit different where we didn't need to change the signatures, but that's okay. So we'll remove both of these and we will apply our changes. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up my headset and we're going to see if this works. All right, so I think that we're almost good to go. Let's hit play and we'll see what happens. And there we go. As you can see, I've picked up the drill, and when I pull the trigger on it, our little bit rotates. All right, that about does it for this little silly rambly video. If you'd like to see another one going over more advanced interactables, feel free to leave a comment below. Or if you have a particular use case that you'd like to see me do, feel free to let me know down there as well. But that's it for me. I'll see y'all around.